It feels like everyone is talking about AI at the moment, but the bit that gets missed is how we actually work alongside it without losing what makes us sharp. I'm keen to chat about how we keep our own thinking at the forefront of all this tech. Welcome back to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya, and today I'm here with Jaime Cassar, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about AI. It's everywhere at the moment, but the real gap is between using the technology and actually what's making it work for us. Jamie looks at how we can stay ahead by growing in our own creativity and staying sharp. It's not about getting left behind, it's about making sure that we don't just let the machines do all the thinking for us. And I'm really looking forward to this one. Jamie is someone who has spent a lot of time thinking about where the world is headed. He is the founder of Inspire You and the lead at Global 3CQ Study. His background is a bit of a mix from applied maths to philosophy to an MBA. For over 20 years, he's been right at the middle of data strategy for some big names like Accenture and Sage. What I find really interesting is that Jamie doesn't look at the tech side of things, he looks at what makes us human. He's focused on something called the creative cognition. It's basically about how we use curiosity and critical thinking to work alongside AI, rather than just letting it take over. He's here to help us and leaders and teams bridge that gap so that we can find real value in these new tools without losing our edge. It's about future proofing our careers and making sure that we stay sharp. Jamie, welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate the invite. Looking forward to the conversation.
You're welcome. Now, tell us a little bit about your journey in life. How did you get here?
I've got quite a mixed background. My parents are Maltese. I was brought up in the UK. My mum and dad left Malta very early. It was like a runaway from controlling parent situation when they were 17. But they made a life for themselves here in the UK and then did eventually reconnect with their family in Malta, which I'm grateful for because I learned a lot from them. I had a quite nice diverse upbringing. My mum played a lot of piano and music, and she loved to read and encouraged us to read. My dad spoke quite a lot of languages, which helped us a lot. And he was an entrepreneur and very inquisitive guy, and that did rub off. I think one of the things that rubbed off as well with all of that was a strong dose of discipline and hard work. And what I mean there is always trying your best and always trying to do your best and be better every day. And that's a mindset that definitely drilled in. Now I think those kind of skills combined with, let's say, good memory probably helped me, let's say, advance, particularly in fields like science and maths, which are very much, the education was about being able to recite facts and follow processes. I think my eyes really opened when I started to study philosophy and pick up philosophy books, because I think I quickly realized that you have what I call quantitative analysis, which is very much what maths is about. And then philosophy is about qualitative analysis and realizing that the world is not black and white and that there are always two different sides to an argument. There is no necessary right or wrong. Yes, there is logic to some standpoint, but really being open to different ideas and understanding the history of ideas and what influenced the formation of those ideas was really something that interested me. And then I think I bridged the gap when it came to studying things like the philosophy of science and learning how science advances and the link between a innovation and imagination mindset and science, which people would think is not apparent, but I could talk about that for hours because most of the biggest discoveries that we know happened based on creative connections between unrelated ideas in science that people put together.
Mm.
That's exactly how Einstein came up with the theory of relativity. He looked at magnetism, electricity. He then realized that if that's predicting that the speed of light is constant, no matter how you measure it, and then on the other side, Galileo's relativity was no matter what happens, whether you're going at a constant speed, every single science experiment will give you the same result. He looked at that and said something doesn't compute. And as he thought about it more deeply, he realized that the reason why the speed of light is constant, no matter the frame of reference, is because space-time bends to ensure the speed of light is constant, no matter where you measure it from and from what viewpoint. And that is a creative leap of two disconnected ideas separated by 300 years that he put together because nobody was asking, and then came up with a new way of thinking about reality. Mind blowing. And so these creative connections are what I'm really interested in, and trying to figure out, well, what is it about the human mind that gives us the potential to do this? And that created a lot of, let's say, stimulation for me when I decided to become a founder and look at how we can unlock people's innovation potential and that creativity, and how does it influence it. And yeah, I'm very passionate about that because I think it's something the world needs now, and to do it as well. In fact, AI has created this opportunity for us to finally start pulling those muscles that we haven't had to pull before.
Yeah, what you mentioned about Einstein and the time space thing, I was reading about it just the other day, and it just blew my mind how, in space time goes faster, but then here in the 3D world it's slower, and I was like, wow,
I was saying that this conversation, this connectivity that we're having, right? So you're in New Zealand, I'm in the UK. Our signal has to, let's say, coincide so that we're having what is a seamless connected conversation. And for that to happen, the clock in satellites, which ticks at a faster speed than the clock here on Earth, needs to be adjusted. Yeah. And the reason why it's ticking at a different speed is because the gravitational force there is different to here.
Mhm.
And the speed that clocks tick at is dependent on the gravitational force that you're in. And if we didn't know how to do those adjustments thanks to his equations, then this conversation would be even more laggy than it is.
Yeah, and maybe it's laggy because I'm in your future and you're in my past.
Maybe.
Wow, we've got a lot to unpack. So when leaders bring AI into business to save time and money, and people naturally start to sort of worry about their roles, how do we make sure that these investments actually grow and the value of humans stays in the room?
Yeah. At least from what I've seen and the way at which businesses are starting to use AI. Efficiency and looking at processes that are predictable and then automating those so you could increase your, let's say, your capacity to handle more. Um, is a good place to start with AI, but that gives you a one-off AI ROI, right? You save in year one. You might save more in year two as people use it more, and then it flatlines very quickly. And it's a good place to start, but people's ambition with AI, given how much hype there is a lot bigger than the amount of ROI that's possible from efficiency alone. So how do we drive that ROI with any investment? Do you think about what business is? Business, and let's say successful business, is bridging the gap between serving unmet needs on one side and doing it with an equitable value exchange. So the piece that comes in the middle that brings those two together, that's innovation. Yeah. So if we're looking at how do we use AI to innovate beyond just making a process, an existing predictable process, faster, then what you're asking there is, how do I create more value by serving unmet needs for a customer at equitable value exchange? And so that requires kind of a form of thinking which innovation needs, which is creativity. So where does creativity come from? It doesn't come from AI. It comes from people. So if you start with AI and you think, okay, I can get some one-off ROI by learning how to use AI through efficiency, yeah, then you're increasing, let's say, your maturity and being used to using AI. That then opens the opportunity for, I've freed up a lot of, let's say, headspace in my organization that I can redirect to innovation. So how do I upskill all of my organization innovation thinking as opposed to cognitive siloing based on function, where there's an assumption that says people in R&D and marketing are more likely to be more creative than those people who sit in finance and sit in supply chain or sit in IT. But that's not true. That's a big assumption. And what makes us human, an innate human, is that innovation potential that needs to be unlocked. And even when we talk about future proofing our careers, how do we unlock that innate innovation potential is something I'm really interested in. And one of the things that needs to happen universally is moving away from that paradigm that creativity and innovation is something that you're either born with or you're not. Whereas in actual fact, evolution gave humanity the capability and toolkit that you're born with to be innovative, because that's what helped us survive in a world where we were discovering our place in it. And that's how we create tools. That's how we created society, based on first learning that together we can go further than we can than being on our own. And so forming let's say, those type of connections then brought language. And then through language comes a different way of being able to think about the world in your head. Yeah. And so that is something which requires innovation, which I can talk more about, but
Mm.
definitely breaking that paradigm and realizing it's a skill that can be learned. And if companies and people work together to unlock that skill, it will drive more innovation for companies, which will lead to higher ROI gains from investments in AI that are targeted at innovating. And then for people, it's around, okay, so I don't need my mind to be used to execute and remember lots of things, because AI is brilliant at that. So how do I use more of my mind to do things that humans actually love to do, which is create stuff? And that's where we have this big potential with AI that I'm excited.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you that AI is going to give us back critical thinking and creativity. And it, from what you said, it all sounds like what you were saying is that having a growth mindset rather than having a fixed mindset. But then going even beyond that and having a champion mindset that anything is possible. Like you said, we have in this industrial age we've been just doing tasks, and most businesses measure ROI by money. Whereas instead of going, well, actually, how much energy and how much brain space are we actually giving back to the human that can then do more meaningful things and create more amazing stuff, right? Because if
Yes.
you've got more room
Yeah.
to be creative, and I remember being in a business about 3 years ago and saying to the team, saying, "You guys need to be doing more R&D, more research and development." "Oh, we haven't got time because we've got all these tasks to do." I'm like, "Well, the business is looking for your thought leadership. They're looking for your
Yeah.
thought leadership, not task leadership." What does that reallocation look like when it's done with empathy?
Yeah. That's a very good thing. I think done with empathy is that there are two sides to that, right? So whenever a company is going through change, you have the experts who understand the processes that you're trying to change, who need to be brought in. So if you're going to create, let's say, the belief that there's a external trigger for change that they need to get behind, then you need to bridge the gap between kind of, let's say, why is it important to the company, but why is it important to them? And so to do that, that requires a high level of empathy, really understanding, what it is that motivates your people. Why are they working for your company in the first place? Why is it that they believe in the mission of the company, and what motivates them to, let's say, give you their time? Yeah. So, people in the end of the day have a choice about
Hmm.
where they work. Right? So understanding your people is very important. I think the other thing then is empathy around customer. It's key. Yeah. So people's needs are changing, people's perspectives are changing. And so companies to innovate, and innovation definitely starts with empathy from the perspective of really trying to understand kind of what the personas, the mindsets, the problems behind the kind of solution space that you're in. Yeah. So what do people value, and how is that changing? And so if we remember, business fundamentally is understanding what people value and where are the unmet needs, and then how to, let's say, deliver solutions with value.
Hmm.
That's how profit gets made. Yeah. So if companies are going to keep growing, then empathy, starting with the customer and starting with the people who help to deliver those services, is very important. And in a world where you're bringing AI to do efficiency, then it's extra important, because that AI can't just be automating an existing process, right? Because we know that existing processes aren't perfect. So you've got the opportunity to look for ways to improve them. A lot of the time, unfortunately, in a, let's say, a kind of a capitalistic impatience to deliver value quickly, ROI is chased by putting AI in as quickly as possible. Empathy goes out the window. Customers get a worse experience, but so do employees too, you know? And then you have no ROI, because you're then left fixing. Yeah. And so it's being really careful. And it goes beyond empathy then, because there's the empathy to realize what you need to do in the design of your solution, even if it's an AI solution. But then there is how you work with the AI to get to the right solution, because AI inherently engineered to give you the most plausible sounding words in the quickest time possible because they want to keep you engaged.
Mm.
And so when it sounds plausible and when it's delivered quickly, then people are like, wow, yes, that must be the right solution. And then your curiosity turns off. You accept what the AI kind of suggests as being the first answer. You don't critically think. You execute quickly in the hope that the AI must be right because it's trained on, the world's, let's say, data, all of it. But it's not always right. you know, it's just giving you, it's calculating the most plausible sounding words based on what you input. So I think there are some schools of thought that say the I in AI is hyperbole because are they intelligent or are LLMs just word calculators? Yeah, I think there's kind of something in the middle. I don't think it's one or the other. But I think being aware of how AIs and LMs have been engineered to give us the quickest, most plausible sounding answer to keep us hooked on it, especially because it's a highly competitive space, is something that we need to all be cognizant of.
Yeah, because like you said, the data that's out in the web is not all accurate and could be, yeah, and it's a probability engine, right? So it's giving you the probability based on your question on that and giving you the best answer it can. So how do we shift from seeing AI as a threat to seeing it as a partner?
We talked about innovation before and those mindsets that unlock that innate innovation potential. So what is it? So there are kind of three as I see them. So there's our innate ability to be curious. There is critical thinking and what I call creative experimentation. So let's start with first realizing that these are skills that we're all born with. Yeah. So if we unlock our kind of inner child. As children, when we're born, we're like sponges, we're inquisitive. That is curiosity engineered into the human straight away. Yeah. There is that innate desire to want to touch the world. When you go out with your kids, especially their toddlers, you spend half the time telling them not to touch things. But that's their way of like getting to know the world and being curious. And then critical thinking as a child, well, your child will never ask you, especially when they're a toddler, they'll never ask you why once. You will answer their first question and then they will ask you why again and again. And that is the mind's innate critical thinking coming through in that childlike form. And then creative experimentation as a child is all about play and variation. And children like to play. They like to mix things around and remix and see what works, see what doesn't work for them. And again, that's something that you don't teach. So there are these three skills that we don't necessarily teach and that come through, but they are skills that can be honed. So if, like skills, if you don't hone them, then they become dormant. In a lot of society, particularly the way that we're educated, you think back to the story I was telling before, how as a mathematician, critical thinking certainly came into play, but it was a lot of critical thinking, being able to imagine how the world is, so curiosity to some extent, but very much relied on memory, process, critical thinking, and abstraction, which is good skills. But as a philosopher, I realized no, I needed to go deeper and learn what was behind the mathematics I was learning, what stimulated that, and look at how we reason. And so then you see that those three skills can be developed. So in adult minds, those three skills manifest through, let's say, for example, curiosity would be open-mindedness. So realizing that the world is a lot bigger than the perspectives that you can currently see it from, and always being open to being wrong. Seeking diverse stimulation as a way of going from curiosity to creativity. And then empathy is a big part of curiosity, right? So we talked about how important it is. And so the more curious you are, the more you have a desire to understand people's motivations, people's frustrations, people's desires. And so empathy being very, like, let's say, that third important piece of curiosity. And then with critical thinking, there is, yes, asking why. But why are we asking why? It's because we want to understand the system. We want to understand first principles. We want to understand the assumptions and hypotheses behind things. And so that's where critical thinking manifests in business, and a skill which we can use AI for. And you'd think, really? How can AI help us with critical thinking? But if you ask AI to give you reasons why your idea is good, it will. But if you ask AI to give you reasons why your ideas might have weaknesses, ask it to play devil's advocate, it will as well. And that's a brilliant way to first start using AI as a tip, to ask it to be brutal in its feedback to you and be your devil's advocate. And then creative experimentation. When it comes to at least how that's manifest beyond play, you think as businesses, we have ideas, we turn those into prototypes. If we embrace failure as learning, then we're, let's say, willing to let our prototypes kind of be rusty, and you try them out, they fail, but then you get feedback, right, on why they fail. And then you can iterate, and then you can prototype again. And that's kind of like adult play. Yeah. And that's definitely something that AI can help us with. It can help us with designing prototypes quickly, designing the experiments so that you can fail fast and get the right feedback that you need in terms of the signal to help you iterate. And so when you realize that AI can be that tool to think with us instead of for us, but we need to be at the wheel applying those three C's of get it to help us be curious, show us more possibilities for more ideas. Creative experimentation with AI, it has, let's say, two parallel streams. There is using AI to help you design the prototypes and the experiments for testing them so you can iterate, and that creates that creative experimentation loop. Embracing failure as learning is very, very important in that. And then on the other parallel stream, it's using AI as your innovation partner. We can now, let's say, all learn new skills using AI if we're curious, and we get it to help guide us through step by step. And we use critical thinking to try to understand what it's telling us to do. So that's not vibe coding. Vibe coding is where people type in a set of requirements to the AI and say, build me a app that does this, and bang, and everyone talks about those. But you don't understand what it's based on. You can never give it enough context for it to give you the right solution. So you always have to experiment. And if you don't understand how it works, then you're going to be iterating with, for you, it's like basically mashing the mashed potato and expecting to get let's say, a different flavor from constant mashing. It doesn't work.
It's interesting you say that because I have been vibe coding. I think I've shown you some the stuff that I've built, and yes, there's been the odd failure here and there, but all in all, it's actually done a really, really great job. Now, the difference is
Um,
that I use my critical thinking, but I use ChatGPT to iterate and ideate the content first. Once I've
yeah, very good.
Yes, so what I'm doing is actually using ChatGPT as my ideation partner, and then I'm using Lovable AI as my build partner. So they do different separate things.
Yes, as your
Yeah,
engineer.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so because ChatGPT knows me and knows everything about my business for the last 3 years, I
yeah,
can give it a prompt and say, or I can just talk to it in dictation mode and say, this is what I'm looking at building. I want you to give me this, give it the context. It then then we go back and forth until I'm happy with what it's given me. And then I'll say, now give me the lovable prompt to then go and build this. It then gives me the lovable
yeah,
prompt. I take and I'll go, hey, I want you to build this, but make sure you don't break any of the stuff that's already there. And just make sure that this is just an enhancement to what we've already built. What I've found is that 95% of the time, it pretty much works
yeah.
straight away. So,
I would say what you're doing there is not vibe coding. A lot of the upfront software engineering you're doing,
yeah, and ChatGPT, yeah.
you with ChatGPT in your mind.
And my critical thinking
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
creativity as well. Yeah.
So what you're doing is so much of the engineering and design side up front that you're removing a lot of the unpredictability from what you're giving Lovable to eventually code for you.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's a big difference between just saying, I
Sure.
want a piece of software that
Put
does
me
this,
this. Yeah, exactly.
build
Yeah.
it for me,
Yeah.
versus I'm doing a lot of upfront thinking to kind of engineer the solution, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, where do I need information to be stored, where do I need it to get information from, how do I want it to use different bits of information. That's kind of 90%
Yeah.
of the job, whereas it didn't used to be. It
No.
used to be a far bigger side of the job because coding used to take time and required testing. And so now, where yes, AI can code in the same way that it can generate words for us, and so you're using it for that skill. It's kind of like, I would say the analogy is of what you're doing. You're not just going to Lovable and saying, "Write me a story about a lovable fish that doesn't have good memory and gets lost under the sea." Yeah. Yeah. You're not doing that really. What you're doing is you're coming up with the character construction,
Mm.
the different arcs of the journey that that character goes through, the
Yeah.
relationships it has between different characters, its history. You're
Yeah.
doing all of that up front. That then you give that to Lovable,
Yeah.
and you're saying, package that into a story for me, but use my words, do this, do that. And it becomes more like an editor than a
Hu-
creator. If that makes
100%.
sense.
And also then I get Lovable to then write me a technical document and a product document and everything, so that everything that I've built is also stored in there, so that I can go back and
Yes.
reference it. And also Lovable has that in the knowledge base as well. And but a lot of the thing is, a lot of the stuff that I've been building has been in my head for 3 years. Because when
Yeah.
I started this podcast 2.5, 3 years ago, when I was coaching, I had a vision of what I wanted to build in the future. And what I've done now is now gone, this is the time I can do this. And then I might be interacting, I might have a problem doing something, I come up with a problem and I go, bang, okay, I need to build this. So, for example, I'm doing Clarity AI coaching at the moment. And so, what I did is I said, right, ChatGPT, we're going to build a landing page so that clients can come and they can register. Then we're going to build a pipeline in the background where we manage all that. We're going to have reporting. We're going to have an integration with Zero so I can do invoicing, everything, and literally have built my own SaaS product in the back end of
Yeah.
Lovable. And also the guesting system that people come through now. They go to a landing page, they book their call, they fill out the form, and all that information comes straight into one place. I don't look at my email or anything. It just goes into one guesting pro.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. It's exactly how I approach building Inspire You. Yeah.
Yeah,
So there was me starting with, okay, so I have this hypothesis around how unlocking innovation potential means reconnecting with their inner child and exercising those curiosity, critical thinking, and experimentation muscles, right? So how do I deliver solutions that help people apply that kind of in their day-to-day life? Did a lot of research, but you use AI to help me with the research too, you know? To learn about, let's say, how those kind of three mindsets that we talked about get engaged and stimulated in the brain and the ways to provide those types of experiences. And then how do I codify that in a experience within an app? And so Inspire You stimulates critical thinking by giving people a um, a 30-word synopsis of a topic from a whole range of topics, and then asks them reflective questions to help them go from, I've just learned a insight about communication skills. Great. So, okay. Then the prompt is, how do I connect that to my life? And then that bridges the gap between reading something and actually learning something. And then it gives you a challenge and it asks you, okay, come up, let's think about one way we can apply that today. How will you, Jamie, exercise your skills around the need to communicate with charisma? And so that was a great opportunity. I'm in a podcast. Yeah.
mm,
The app also tries to help people apply curiosity, critical thinking, creativity when working with AI. So what the AI helped me engineer and design and think about is, how do I build and use an AI API, which is your standard LLM, which is sycophantic, which tries to get you to the answer. And then how do I tame it with prompt engineering and other AIs that are prompt engineered to tame the one that's talking to you, and also data flows as well. So it learns about your context and do that simultaneously in a way that you're not no longer talking to an AI that's engineered to give you the answer, but one that's engineered to be your innovation partner and coach. And so on the Inspire You website now, there is a design thinking companion that will help you go through the innovation steps when you're building something. There's a North Star coach, which will help you innovate yourself. Yeah. So thinking about what are the aspirations that I have in my personal and professional life, and what are the gaps that I need to fill to pursue those, and how do I make sure they're rooted in kind of my authentic ethos as opposed to what the expectations the world has on me. And so using AI as a thought leader to help you kind of engineer solutions, even AI solutions, is absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And so the common thread, being curious with the AI, critical thinking, don't take its first answer, challenge it, but at the same time, be honest to yourself, get it to challenge you. And then, yeah, creative experimentation. You try, you iterate, that's what we've been going through. The entrepreneur revolution and how we can each use AI to help us innovate. Now you imagine a team of people in a company who can all do that. Yeah. Everyone can innovate and prototype very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that to work, then people need to be given the space to express their natural creative cognition, their curiosity, critical thinking, and creative experimentation. Companies also need to encourage the development of those skills as well. And
Yeah.
that will make people more valuable going forward. That's how we'll future-proof our careers, but we'll future-proof the companies we work for as well, because we'll create more innovation that way.
Yeah.
That's
100%.
how we get the AI ROI up.
100%. I totally agree with you there. That is spot on. How do we get businesses to adopt that? The
Yeah.
$1 million question, right?
No, I absolutely, because this all sounds fantastic. I'm painting this utopia, but okay. So we talked before, right? Business is there's an unmet, underserved need, and there's an equitable value exchange. Yeah. So bridging that gap in the middle, we talked about innovation, the concept of it. But for businesses to believe it's an equitable value exchange, we need to demonstrate that there is a correlation. Is my mathematician side coming out? But a correlation between the level of creative cognition that a team has or an individual has and their likelihood of driving value with AI and how much value they drive. Yeah. So what I call the CQ AI value equation. So in order to answer this question, I'm doing a couple of things. And so this is the free CQ research I'm working on with the Open University. So one, I've come up with a way to use behavioral anchored rating scales to be able to measure somebody's level of curious exploration, critical thinking, and creative experimentation through a survey where they're asked to answer questions around the typical behaviors that they apply in circumstances. And those behaviors are on a scale which are anchored in a way that would tell you whether they're applying more or less curiosity, more or less critical thinking, etc. So they go through that survey. But before I ask those questions, we ask them typically what level of value are you achieving repeatedly with AI? Yeah. So people may say, okay, I'm doing mostly efficiency, right? So it's a efficiency one. But then they might be the people who are using AI to create improvements in their processes, which would be augmentation. And then there would be those people who are using AI as that thought partner and innovation partner, using it, in the same way that you are. And that's transformational AI value because it's transforming the amount of value that you're able to deliver. So you ask those questions first, then ask the questions around how people are expressing their curiosity, critical thinking, creativity in different circumstances. So it's real. It's not an opinion. It's do you do this, this, or this? And so then what you get is a way to score CQ and a way to score AI value, and then bring the two together to see if there's correlation. Yeah. And so the initial results still N isn't big enough. I want N to be at least 1,000 before I start publishing the paper. But at least the initial results are showing that there is a correlation. Yeah. That those people who innovate with AI are expressing more of their curiosity, critical thinking, and creative experimentation, and aren't allowing themselves to fall asleep at the wheel and let AI do the thinking for them. Because for those people, there's too much at stake. That's the other thing. When you're using AI to build your business as an entrepreneur, so much at stake for you because you're putting in your time, you're putting in your money. So you're more likely to kind of pause and say, am I looking at enough information here? Am I really like, let's say, being honest with myself and trying to prove that I'm wrong first before I just prove that I'm right? And so it's great. So definitely, I think once you kind of come up with that equation that says, based on your level of CQ, you can predict the amount of value that you'll get with AI. And that equation like helps to create a interesting conversation with companies. Because the question was, how do we get companies to care about growing people's CQ? Well, if companies are investing in AI, um, and they're investing in AI so they can drive value with AI, and they can see that the amount of AI value they're likely to deliver is correlated to the level of CQ that is in the organization or in different teams, then help me measure that.
Mm.
So that's what we can do with the study. And then we can also benchmark them versus, here's your CQ. Here is the CQ of other organizations who are delivering high value of AI consistently. What's the difference in the CQ value? And how much gap is there to bridge in either curiosity, critical thinking, or creative experimentation?
Mm.
And then people will start to care about it, I think.
Mm.
And so that study, as well as me being honest with myself and testing, is curiosity, critical thinking, and creativity really what's needed to drive value with innovation? Yeah. Is then helping to say, well, so how do I turn this into a product that fulfills the need of a business, which
Mm.
is fulfilling their needs to upskill everybody in creative cognition, those three C's that I talked about, so that they can drive AI value.
Yeah, love it. It's deep. Love to dig into that a bit more at some time. The idea of an entrepreneur revolution, because AI has lowered the cost of building things. How do those same cognitive skills that you talk about help someone actually find success as a founder?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because it's not at all about how you use the AI. Yeah. Success as a founder. Well, I think we talked about empathy at the start. So founders are looking at ways to solve problems to create equitable value exchange. So understanding the problem starts with understanding the people who, um, let's say, suffer from the problem. Yeah. So there are the people who suffer from the problem that you want to make heroes. There's understanding the villains. So what's causing the problem? There's understanding the effect that the problem has on people. You know, why is it a valuable problem to solve? Well, you understand the effect it has on them emotionally, the effect it has on them financially, and time wise, for example. So curiosity expressed through first a deep desire to build empathy, to understand the problem, yeah, is really important as a founder. I think most founders that are successful are the ones that discover that there's a valuable enough problem to solve.
Mm.
Yeah. For those people. Yeah. So then there is the way in which you create the solution, right? So maybe there's the problem exists because the technology or the way to solve the problem hasn't been created yet, or some technologies have been created but not been applied in that problem space. So that is definitely about critical thinking, right? As a founder, if you try to invent all of your solutions from scratch, you'll be spending a lot of time, which will only be worth it if you invest the time up front to work out whether there's a technology that you could use to help you solve
Mm.
the problem that you've understood with empathy. Or, no, there aren't any technologies that exist quite right, but I could kind of use some and adapt them in this particular way to help me deliver that solution. Yeah. And so the critical thinking is really important because our innate desire to want to create things as humans, because we needed it for survival, right? We all built our own houses. Yeah. We all started first by everybody building their own shelters in the ways that they think, but then they learn the expertise of building shelter through the stories that their elders tell them, or the skills that their elders pass on to them, or the skills that they see other tribes using to build their shelters, which seem to be better. So that kind of human kind of connection and trying to figure out whether the solution has been created before or whether there are things that can help you that you can learn, that level of critical thinking is very important when it comes to being a founder, because otherwise you can go down the route of reinventing the wheel.
Mm,
It's a lot of time and money that potentially get wasted. And then creative experimentation. So as a founder, particularly what I'm learning is the need for resilience and embracing failure as learning. Yeah. So I used to think the opposite of success was failure. You think as a mathematician, you either failed the test or not. Yeah, you didn't answer the question right or you didn't. And in some ways in business, that kind of gets pushed onto people, that mindset too, around the opposite of success being failure, where you made a commitment, you created this forecast, you told us that this is how much we would deliver in terms of revenue. No, that didn't happen. Yeah, you failed. Yeah. So no, the opposite of success is doing nothing. Yeah. When you're so paralyzed by the fear of failure, failure gets you used in business as a way to determine how much remuneration or bonus we gets withheld. But it's true, right? You said you would deliver these results, or this is the target you've been given, or the target that you helped set engineer, and you miss it, then yeah, you don't get as much reward.
mm,
But while that's fair, it engineers a mindset of I need to avoid failure. I need to not make as big commitments. That will help me avoid failure. But actually, what you're doing there is then you don't innovate, right? So you're
yeah.
doing nothing,
Yeah, if you do nothing,
and
then
it's
then you failed, but taking action is not
you can't
failure.
succeed.
Yeah.
Exactly. As a founder, every knockback that you get is a signal that you can use to reiterate and try again and try again. And all the salespeople out there will know what I'm talking about, right? Because they're telling everyone they've got the hardest job in the world. And I do believe them because getting knockbacks day in, day out, not every, your company has told you you've got the best solution in the world. Go and sell it. You'll make, yeah, it's not that easy. Yeah, yeah. Even if you've got the right data, there's the relationships, there's timing being an important thing. Is it somebody's need right now when everybody's so busy? Yeah,
Mm,
they might need it. But is it read right now?
yeah.
Those are the things that you learn as a founder. That resilience, that's so important.
Yeah.
Uh, Creative experimentation definitely helps you build that resilience because you embrace failure as learning, and that's how you succeed.
Yeah. And a manager of mine years ago said to me when I was in sales ripping, he said, "Do you know what mistakes are?" I said, "They're bad." And he said, "No, no, they're not." He said, when you make a movie, you have a lot of mistakes." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you eventually get the right take and you make the multi-million dollar movie." So he says, mistakes are just part of the process. And you just learn to refine things and make it better. So, no one ever. It's like making a pancake. When you first make the pancake mix and you put your first pancake on, it's never going to be perfect, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
because
It's
the pan's
strange how
still
that happens, isn't it?
because the pan's still heating
Yeah,
up, and you get to get the
yeah,
optimal heat and so on, and then so yeah, it's the same as making a pancake. So if you fail
yeah.
the first time, just keep going until you actually get it right. Now, it's so tempting to just let AI do all the heavy lifting and essentially fall asleep at the wheel. What's one small habit someone can start today to make sure that this tech sharpens their mind instead of replacing it?
I think one of the highest impact differences in using AI would be at first using it as a devil's advocate. Yeah, definitely. Because it's so keen to give you the first right answer as quickly. That sounds highly plausible as quickly as possible. And it'll even give you citations as well. Yeah, around that. And it's so tempting then just to say, that sounds so plausible. It's based on some evidence. I don't need to think anymore. Once you ask it, why could you be wrong? Where are the nuances? Where is there circumstances this doesn't work? Then it becomes really interesting because you then get two different perspectives. And it's not about weighing up what's right or wrong between those two things. The magic happens when you realize that in the devil's advocate response, there are ways to help de-risk what you're trying to do. Yeah. So you will ask the AI to help you develop an idea around helping future people's careers, right? Like I did. Yeah. And it will say, oh, yes, develop a learning app. Yeah. Develop an app where people can come in and learn new skills. And here's why it's important. And here are all the companies who've had success doing that. If I'd have settled with that, I'd have built another Coursera or tried to and failed miserably. because people don't want to learn. What they want is the results you get from learning. There's a difference. If you design an education experience that's all about the education and the learning experience, well, that's not why people want to learn. So you get high retention and high monetization rates in learning sites. Depends. But the range, particularly in edtech, is very high in terms of monetization, for sure, because a lot of them are obsessed with the learning experience as opposed to how do I help people get impact with new information as quickly as possible. Yeah. So there are companies that do that in a different way. Yeah. So Duolingo didn't think, how do I help create a learning experience that gives people as much information as possible? They didn't do that. They created a learning experience that's fun, that's gamified, that makes you want to come back and get loads of fictitious points. I know it's addictive. I'm like on a 2,000-day streak learning Japanese, but I absolutely love it because it's 5 minutes of mental stimulation. That's what they've cracked. They realized that what I wanted was the impact that I get from learning. And in that case, it was learning Japanese for fun. And for me, it was around, yes, I'm doing something that's productive. Yeah, and I can apply it. So when I watch movies in Japanese, which I like doing, then now I understand them. So don't need the dubbing anymore. Yeah, so the Japanese accents are in, and it's great. But there are lots of examples where that happens. So yes, first tip would be devil's advocate. Be its devil's advocate, or ask it to be its devil's advocate on the response it gives, or be your devil's advocate. Once you do that, the possibilities open up, and then it invokes more curiosity and more creative experimentation.
People want information instantly these days. They want the experience rather than actually going through and learning. You don't get an experience of something without actually doing the work. Change in life, for example, unless you put in the work, that you're not going to be able to change. Unless you let go of things, you're not going to be able to change and become the better version of yourself. Now, you've spent two decades in data strategy with some of the massive companies that we mentioned earlier. What was it that you saw happening in those industries that made you realize we needed a tool like Inspire You?
There is what was happening for a long time, and then what has happened with AI and the changes that's stimulated. I think what I saw when I first started working in businesses is strong cultures that communicate the values of a company. And there are boards everywhere that tell you this is how you're expected to behave. These are the things you're expected to value. And then seeing the gap between those words and how people actually behaved. Yeah. And so a common value that you'll see in companies is some form of being bold, of being courageous. But that's where probably one of the biggest disconnects happens, because companies like predictability and they don't like, there are companies who embrace risk are the ones that fly. Big companies may have grown quickly by embracing risk, but they stay big by being choiceful about where they put the risk, right? And so that creates a tension between the level of risk that people are expected or able to take versus the level of appetite that the company has. And when I see those types of disconnects, what that leads to is a kind of innovation skills not being democratized. And what I mean is there are certain functions where you're expected to execute and deliver repeatable process, high quality, supply chain, finance, legal, they all work like that. Yeah. That's what they're expected to do. And changing the process is a big disruption and it's big risk, and it might create more efficiency or it might create even more value for your customers. But not everybody is asked to put on that kind of mindset of looking for ways to create change that creates disruption. And so then what happens is there'll be the great leaders who actually embrace people's innovation potential and try to help them with taking those great ideas and putting them into action. And there are other leaders who are like, this is too risky for me. We've got these are our goals. We need to stick to those. So we need to focus. Let's not do that right now. Yeah. And then you keep putting those great ideas under the carpet. Yeah. Well, that's what happens. And
Mm.
it then creates but it has a big cultural impact in a company that I saw, because people don't ask questions to play devil's advocate anymore. It's seen as being uncollaborative. People don't ask why a lot because people get the feeling that it exposes their kind of level of unawareness about things they think they should be aware of, but
Mm.
you shouldn't think we need to know everything. And then there is the who are those that get invited to the party to innovate, and who are those that don't. And in companies, what happens is the things that they make choices to innovate on become the flavors of the month. And if you're working on that, your exposure goes up. And if you're not, your exposure goes down and your perceived importance goes down. And that's not good for people. And
Mm.
I've just seen a lot of big companies kind of work that way, where
Yeah,
it's then dependent on how good the leaders are
I
of
have, yeah.
whether that innovation potential gets expressed.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of one long thing that I thought, how do we get people to realize that these 3C skills, this innovation mindset is something which is a skill that can be honed. And the first thing that fueled my fire in that was working in finance, because that's where I started, and being told by somebody in marketing that I work in finance, so I'm not creative. And oh my God, how pissed off I was, but I kept it inside me. How do I
Yeah.
make that like, I'll show that person? No, but yes and no, because it's good to have a fuel in the fire. But I did realize, well, actually, what does creativity mean? And that's what got me to like becoming more interested in that theory of the 3 Cs, based on me learning about a research from Adam Grant and Kashdan, who's another big innovator, and the Christensen Institute. A lot of thinking has gone into what are the traits that make people innovate. Okay, so that's the thing that's happening for a long time. And then AI comes along, yeah? And people are being asked to be involved in projects to automate what they work on, so that then that headcount gets freed up, and it doesn't always get reallocated, right? The capacity reduces. And I was involved in projects like that at Accenture and at Sage. I thought, we're investing in one-off ROI, let's say gains, which we pay for by reducing our capacity to innovate at the company, by removing people. And that doesn't seem quite right.
You could
And
you could be putting those people into a special team that does innovation, right?
yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If there are people who want to express those innovation muscles, then why not let them? Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
the if there are people that don't, then fine. If they want to, they're happy being in a job where they're just expected to execute, then yes, it probably makes sense that they look for that type of job elsewhere if those opportunities don't exist in your company.
It just
Yeah.
makes you wonder because it's always about the dollar amount. It's all about we've got to save this much. But it's never looked at in a way of like, if we automated a whole lot of stuff and if we used AI and we used and technology and innovation, then we could do so much more. It's about ass about face, really, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, definitely. It's economic realities, right? We both believe that there's got to be a better way than just um, using AI to reduce headcount and
Yeah.
expecting that the world to get
Well,
better.
we've both been in the corporate world, seen it, experienced it,
Yeah,
and we're out of it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yes, because I certainly came to a point where one of the things that my last project, and it was the reason why it was my last project in Accenture, is because it was involved in digital transformation that led to a lot of headcount reduction. The client, and that was a bit sad. And then at my last job, um, in fact, I'd worked on a lot of data strategy to make the company AI ready, to the point where they were AI ready and they didn't need a data strategist. So they thought, but okay, like brilliant. There's so much untapped value that sits out there. And that was the final thing that I needed to go from having an idea to be a founder to let's go.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
In the same way that I was helping make AI ready organizations with data, thought let's be an AI ready, let's say, creator of talent. So now I'm in the business of helping people be AI ready, if you like, because I call my website, the brand is Inspire You. You need inspiration before you're willing to put in the effort to innovate. And so that inspiration part is important. And the domain is inspireyou.ai. And it's because I don't think AI is the enemy. Yeah. It's one of those things where if you see it as an enemy, that is not the champion mindset, right? You're kind of like, let's say, you're in the opposite of success of doing nothing type of territory. But if you're willing to think about how can I use AI to build my own skills and like, turn the visions of ideas that I've had into realities and prototypes I can test. And there is so much possibility for transforming yourself or transforming yourself and the company that you work for,
Yeah,
that it's really important. Then that humanity and AI are kind of combined in a way that augments the possibility of what we can create without it.
yeah,
And I think that's where then humanity will win. Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
If we've got that mindset around AI and using it to solve unmet needs for an equitable value exchange, but doing it sustainably,
yeah.
which is always very important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, last question. You've done your work with the Global 3CQ study on how we can co-innovate with AI. For those of us who are not researchers,
Yeah.
how should we be thinking about our own creative cognition?
Yeah. Well, okay. So come to inspireyou.ai and do the CQ test. It's
Perfect.
free experience. So when I built this test, what it does is it generates a report for you straight away that tells you your innovator profile, where and what strengths that you have when it comes to innovation, and where are the opportunities to um, kind of, let's say, focus on to boost your strengths even more, if you like. And that's all based on the input that you give it. And so when you do the test, 50% means you're at the average level of CQ. Yeah. Because the way that the behavioral anchored rating scales happens is that the mid scoring answer is based on the typical behaviors that you see across curiosity, critical thinking, creative experimentation. So how far away you are from that 50% in terms of higher tells you your strengths, and lower tells you where you have an opportunity to improve. And it will tell you in the report what things that you can do to go from where you might be lower scoring to become a high scoring, or it will tell you where you're already high scoring and there's where you need to double down. Yeah. And so that's a way of learning about what innovation potential is and how to grow it through those three C's.
Mm.
Yeah. So the research, as well as helping generate data to answer that question of is there a link between AI value and CQ, is also helping us to understand how far are people in business really away in terms of higher or lower by function, by industry, on those three C skills of creativity, that curiosity, being critical, and being an experimenter. So I could have gathered all that data, but I wanted to make sure it was an experience that would be insightful for people. So you get that instant report. You don't need to use the app if you don't want to. A lot of the solutions in my app, I don't have a hard paywall. You can start using AI in the app straight away. The AI in the app is called Aurelius. It's inspired by Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic, who believed in something called intellectual humility. So, we were talking about devil's advocate before, being willing to be wrong. That's intellectual humility. That
Mm.
is why the AI in my app is called Aurelius, and why I've spent so much time trying to engineer out the sycophancy and the get you to the quickest answer as quickly as possible type of mindset from the AI, so that it can work with you to help you go through frameworks on innovation like design thinking and help you apply your own curiosity, critical thinking, and creative experimentation. Because it's been trained now to look out for, are you being curious enough? Are you pushing back on it enough? And are you thinking about how you can go from where you are now to a prototype that is actually testable? So I've made it, a lot of it free up to a certain limit, of course. So, the self paywall, but it means that you can start experimenting straight away. So I would say come to my own app, but then if not, start with that tip that I talked about before. When you work with AI, devil's advocate.
Yeah, yeah. Now, before we go into the quickfire questions, I'd love for you to share about how can people get in touch with you. You talked about your website. Just tell us a little bit more, and then we'll kick into the quickfire questions.
Yeah, yeah. So LinkedIn, it's a great way to get in touch with me. Jaime Cassar, look me up. Through the app as well. In the app, all the methodologies around how it works are there. They've got links to me. There's a persistent feedback capturing part in the app where you can click that. That will send me an instant email as well.
Yeah.
Good ways to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Sounds good. We'll put those into the show notes, and also you'll get a dedicated page on the Champion Mindset Collective Hub website, and yeah,
Thanks.
it will have your bio, your links, episode information, the videos. It will have an article that's written from this podcast episode as well. And then the article gets distilled down to a 3-page practical guide with some of the gems that we've heard on this episode that people can
Yeah.
actually
Thanks.
download for free, and they can start to make a change in in their business and their life. In addition to that, what I'm offering is a AI clarity session for people who may be overwhelmed or they like haven't got the clarity. So get in touch with me, and there is a link on the AI Workflows website. But just get in touch with me, and I can direct you to the right place. Now, six questions, quick answers, short sentence or single word. First question for you is, how do you define success, and has that definition evolved for you over time?
Yeah. So I define success by any time I've helped solve problems for someone, I think. Yeah. So if I'm helping people, then I'm happy, whether it's one or 100,000. Yeah. You're gonna help that one, I can start helping more. So yeah, definitely
100%.
believe in.
Yeah. Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
Okay, so I think it's hard to bring it down to one person for me. Sorry, I sound like a politician.
Okay.
Like how my dad behaved when he's behaved well has been a good inspiration. My grandma, my father's mother, her attitudes to life and the way she worked, the way she communicated. But then I've had teachers as well who've opened up my mind to so many different things, who've definitely like been an inspiration. If I try to think, let's say for now, where I'm looking for moments of inspiration at the moment, I'm working a lot on trying to improve my communication skills. And there's a guy called Vin Jiang who does a lot around communication skills, and
Mm,
I find him very inspiring. And sometimes I'll go and look at his stuff for inspiration as well.
yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
What is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
Well, I'll start with one. I think that we live in a society where consent is manufactured to create a lot of apathy and Western exceptionalism. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
That failure isn't the opposite of success. Doing nothing is. Don't be afraid of failure.
Agreed. What is one message that you'd like to share with the world?
Yes. Okay. Going to go back to empathy again. So we want to create a better world. Empathy is about putting yourselves in the shoes of others to really kind of understand but feel the pain. Understand what excites them as well. And it's the start of a virtuous cycle, because through empathy we can kind of develop mutual respect. If you understand people, you'll respect them. And then when there is respect, there's trust. And so that means that people will start forming alliances and relying on each other. And then when there's trust, there's generosity, and we start to give more than take away. Help each other in a way by giving people things. We keep doing that, that's going to make a better world, right? And I think that we're living in a world where it's driven by a lot of political divisiveness. Division is being exploited. Empathy has just gone out the window, you know. And so now we're on that kind of vicious cycle. Right? Lack of empathy creates lack of respect, trust, and then exploitive behaviors where we try to take instead of give. And that's not the way that will be happy.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Last question is, what does it mean to you to be a champion and have a champion mindset?
I think it would be doing more than I would be done by. Okay. So there's this adage where if you treat people the way you expect to be treated, then they'll treat you the same way. And that's how you should treat people. I do agree with that. That's called do as you would be done by, if you like. But I've since come to realize that you actually have to do more than you would be done by. So leave things kind of in a better condition than you left them. Yeah. Pay it forward. Those kind of things is where that generosity in that loop that I talked about from empathy, respect, trust, generosity comes from. And that's what makes a better world. So a simple do as you would be done by. It sounds to be very transactional. It's like, do the same, but why not do more? Yeah. If you can.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's how it definitely that's success for me. If I can create that flywheel in the world of pay it forward, then I can say I've been a champion. There are little ways I do it, try to do it every day, definitely
Yeah,
with the family.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie. It's been I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's a good reminder that even with our new tech that's here and AI, that our curiosity is still the most important thing that we have, and our critical thinking and our creativity. My biggest takeaway is that we can't just switch off and let machines do the thinking. We need to use these tools to sharpen our own minds because it's a two-way thing. It's like we ask questions, we learn from that, and if you don't know, just ask the AI to give you questions. So we need to use to sharpen ourselves. And then thanks for coming on and sharing your thoughts. It's been amazing. If you're watching this episode and you want to experience more of Jamie's work, then check out his study and the links in the show notes, and also on the episode page that will be on the Champion Mindset Collective Hub website, whatever you want to call it. I call it the Hub because it's actually more than just a website. There you'll be able to, as I mentioned before, you'll be able to read the article, you'll be able to download the practical guide, which I encourage you, it's for free. All you got to do is put your details and download it and start making changes in your life and your business and explore everything else that's on Jamie's website as well as on the Champion Mindset Collective. There's so much more there you can explore. And lastly, I just want to say share this with someone and subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes. And also, sharing this with someone might actually help them. And lastly, I want to say you are loved, you're worthy, champion your life, champion your greatness, and have an amazing day.
Awesome.